Hello! Welcome to Remember, the podcast all about history, mystery, and did you know that bodies have been surfacing in Lake Mead in Las Vegas? Bodies and steel drums, because the mob is real, y'all. It's not just a thing from the movies.
Now, if you said to me, sarcophagi, those things had been surfacing because of the fact that the Egyptians actually had roots in the Grand Canyon, then I'd be like, yeah, I did know that. I've seen all the documentaries. But
What?
no, I've not seen this. Don't even get me started on it, Paula. It's a whole thing. Look at the names of things at the Grand Canyon.
I won't.
It's true. The Egyptians, the Grand Canyon. I love it. Look, I love history, and this, I like to think, is a pretty, we try to be a history podcast. But I'll tell you what, sometimes I get into those mysteries, and I like those too. You
know how there are some things that you hear about and you think, like, that's not real life. It just makes a good story. Or, oh, that's from a long time ago, though. Like this Egyptian Grand Canyon thing. But then, you do research for a podcast you host, and you realize that, no, that shit is real, and actually it's kind of recent. Well, that's what happened to me. And I'm Paula, one of the hosts of this show. And my co-host is a real wise guy, Mr. Matthew, funny like a clown, I amuse you, Jude. Which was a not well executed Goodfellas reference. Have you heard of Jimmy Hoffa?
I've heard the name Jimmy Hoffa.
I'm wondering how, American this reference is, this touch point, this cultural touch point. How American is it,
I should ask my mom if she knows Jimmy Hoffa.
Go ask her right now.
Personally, if she was romantically involved with him.
Could have been.
During the 1970s.
The 1970s was right around the end of his existence. But could have been maybe when he was, early 70s.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I think happened.
Well, I didn't really, as an American, I was kind of, like I said in our intro, I heard a lot of people who were older than me make a lot of references to Jimmy Hoffa and just kind of acted like it was one of those things that, yeah, I should understand. But I realized recently that, I was a kid. I was actually not even a kid yet. I wasn't supposed to know what this was. I was way young. But now I want to know. So I have found out. And now you're going to find out too. So let me set the scene for you. It's July 30th, 1982. Neither host of this podcast is born quite just yet.
Well, one of us is soon to be born, and the other one distantly to be born. Just gonna throw that right out there.
Depends on how you define the word soon. James Riddle Hoffa, great middle name, aka Jimmy, is declared presumed dead. That's his official status. Presumed dead, because on July 30th, 1975, he went to the Makis, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but I think, the Makis Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, a suburb of Detroit. He told his wife that he was meeting Tony Provenzano and Tony Giacoloni there at 2 p.m. I apologize to all the Italians, but I am 25% Italian, so it's okay.
Are you Italian enough to be in the mafia? Or not quite Italian enough? I feel like I look like I could be in the mafia, but I don't think you do.
No, I don't think I'm Italian enough to be able to be in the mafia.
Are you Italian enough to be in a mobster movie?
I mean, I'm enough, I'm talented enough to be an actor in any movie, I would say.
That's not what I asked, and I think you've inserted that.
So, Jimmy told his wife he was meeting the two Tonys at the restaurant at 2 p.m. Around 2:15, he called his wife from a payphone at the restaurant saying he'd been stood up and he was on his way home. He was never seen again.
Bum, bum, ba, 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 ba.
Wow. Most people assume that the mob took out a hit on Jimmy, but it is just an assumption. No one really knows what happened or where he or his body is now. It's still an open case for the FBI, and they were doing digs looking for his remains as recently as 2021. But why would the mob want Jimmy Hoffa dead? And how did he get involved with them in the first place?
Yeah, Paula, those are two questions I should have asked, but you did it. Thanks.
That's my job as the one who did the research this week.
Look, I do research sometimes. So I think this is probably going to come up. Who is Jimmy Hoffa, though? Then why? Who?
Well, Jimmy Hoffa was a union guy.
A union man.
He's a union man, and he sells clarinets to the kids in the town. You have got to get into the Music Man, because this is twice now I think I've made a Music Man reference on this podcast, and you don't get it.
I refuse.
So Jimmy Hoffa was a union guy, and a pretty important one. He started working at a very young age. His father died when he was 7 due to complications from poor working conditions. Lung-related. I think maybe he did some mining.
He got his lungs ripped out by a looming machine in a Victorian warehouse.
Yes. I think he probably had black lung. I'm not 100% sure though. So after this, his family moved to Detroit, and at 14, he quit school and started working. This is early 1900s, by the way. He was doing very blue-collar, manual labor types of jobs. At either 18 or 19 years old, he was working for Kroger, which is a grocery store that is a chain that still exists today in the U.S. It's a really big chain in the U.S. And I think at the time he was doing a job where he was like on the docks helping to load and unload like produce for the store.
Yeah.
The working conditions were not great. The pay was substandard, and teenage Jimmy, perhaps thinking of his father, got his fellow workers to go on strike. From there, he eventually was recruited to be an organizer for Detroit Local 299, the Teamsters Union. And actually, here's a fun fact. It's not written in my script, but he met his wife because they met at like a strike. She was part of, I think like seamstresses. I might have that slightly wrong, who were on strike at the time. And he was there on like the picket lines. And that's how they met. Kind of cute. So over the years, Jimmy grew the Teamsters membership dramatically with over 1 million members by 1951. And he became national vice president in 1952. He led numerous successful strikes. He organized labor groups and finally became national president in 1957. In 1961, he was able to bring almost every over-the-road truck driver in North America under a single agreement. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters was huge and powerful, and so was their pension fund.
Was the agreement for all the truckers to stop pissing in milk jugs and then slinging them onto the side of the road? Because they still do that.
That is the agreement. Exactly.
Way the road, boys. Way the road. That's the way she goes. These are all Trailer Park Boy references, as are a lot of the things I say.
And one day we'll do a trade. We'll all start to understand more of those references, and you'll start to understand more of my Music Man references.
Look, Trailer Park Boy is the best show that's ever been created. It's my favorite show of all time.
So before I talk about how the mob is related to any of this, I want to say that today, the Teamsters is one of the largest labor unions in the world, and it ranges from truck drivers to delivery people to warehouse workers to bus drivers. All kinds of manual labor and infrastructure workers are covered by the Teamsters. And a lot of that is thanks to the growth and the organizing that Jimmy Hoffa did.
You're a union gal, aren't you?
I'm a union gal. Yeah, I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA, which is more of a guild than a union, so it's a little different, but basically, yes.
There's no union for people who just make YouTube videos, so I'm not part of a union.
But maybe one day.
And I'll be honest with you, I've got mixed feelings about unions. I think I've been surrounded by people who are very pro-union and very against unions. So my relationship with the idea of unions is a mixed bag. On the one hand, I do agree, of course, that unions are fantastic ways to get rights and the things that are needed to improve the working life of many people. I'm sure that's what Jimmy Hoffa believed. On the other hand, I see a lot of very, very rich union people who work in unions and they get paid massive wages from all the dues and don't do much. So I don't always feel about unions. Like the train unions really have annoyed many people in the UK. Do I think the train people who work the rails should be in a union? Yes, of course. Do I think it's fair that their union acts in a way that literally puts the whole country as hostages of the railway system? No, I don't think that's a good idea. Often I feel like I agree with the idea of unions, and I totally get that. But I think in practice, what they do seems sometimes very self-centered. So I've got a mixed feeling about it.
Well, when it comes to the Teamsters specifically, I think, and Jimmy Hoffa, there are a lot of mixed feelings, right? And one thing I will say that I think like the Teamsters and the railway workers that you're talking about kind of have in common is the effect they can have on the infrastructure of the country and the power that comes with that.
I don't like being a playing piece in their dispute. I don't think that's fair. And I think there are sometimes unions act in a way that is reckless towards everybody else's lives. And I just don't think that's particularly fair. I don't. And I also think with unions, one last thing, and again, I'm a working class guy. I was born and raised in working class, and I'll be working class until the day I die. That's the way it works in the UK. Is that unions have a ability to protect people who don't deserve to be protected. Sometimes people have done things that are not fantastic, and the unions will protect them. Like in the UK, it is impossible to fire a police officer, basically, or to fire a teacher.
It's very similar in the US. Yes, in the US with police, not teachers, but yeah.
Firing a teacher in the UK, and in the UK, teaching is a very different profession to how it is in America. It's considered a very middle-class, well-paying job, teaching, and it's quite respected. But a teacher can do something, frankly, not fantastic. A teacher would have to do something insane to get fired. And I think that's the teaching union in the UK is the most powerful union. And sometimes they get that from putting everyone as hostages. Anyway, that's enough of that. But yeah.
Well, the police officers union in the US is very similar. It's very difficult to get someone fired for the same reason. And this really does all relate to these feelings of power and the use of an organization to exercise that power and to misuse that power is all related to Jimmy Hoffa and why he is a complicated figure, right? So right now you could go to the International Brotherhood of Teamsters website and they have a whole page about Jimmy Hoffa and talk about what a hero of the working man he was, right? How he fought for the rights of laborers, how he did what needed to be done to secure them better, safer working conditions, better pay, more respect, really important. But how did Jimmy Hoffa accomplish that? So let's back up a bit to when Jimmy Hoffa was in his early organizing days, early 1900s, trying to get workers to come together and strike against their employers. When labor first started organizing in the U.S., the people in those positions of power who owned the companies, they fought back, and they fought back hard and violently. It was not uncommon for them to hire thugs to harass and beat up people on the picket line. So, Jimmy and others started bringing in their own thugs, their own muscle. They felt like they had to fight fire with fire to get what they felt like they needed, what they deserved. And the people that they hired to do the more violent things like car bombings or assault or murder, those people were part of organized crime. Over time, you get into a situation where suddenly the mafia has a lot of sway over the most powerful labor union in the country.
I mean, think about the compromise in integrity that you've taken there to your cause, right? And even if you're doing things for the right reason, which I do think that most unions are doing things for the right reason, if you're compromising yourself to the mafia, then all of a sudden the mafia, you've got to be really careful who you owe a favor to. And You know, it's like, well, the mafia say we need a favor and they need 30 guys to come and do security at this building. And all of a sudden, you got 30 union guys who have to do the security because if they don't, they're going to leak something about you or say something about you or maybe put a hit out on you. And all of a sudden, you are implicated. And I can see how this could snowball out of control super quick.
And yeah, Jimmy Hoffa was no innocent lamb in all of this. He did what he felt he needed to do to hold on to the power that the Teamsters had, to win fights for the workers, but also for himself. He's a complicated guy. He did a lot for workers' rights and labor and union, like I said, but he also did some bad and violent stuff. He started this pension fund in the Teamsters Union, and that's meant to help retired union members, but there's also this idea, and I think evidence,
see where this is going,
that money was being skimmed from this fund to pay off people, to pay off mob members. They used it to invest in a little place you might be familiar with, Las Vegas.
You're using a word investment there with a lot of leniency, I feel like.
Money was borrowed from this pension fund to start up casino resorts.
Because you'll make the money back and then no one will know it was ever missing.
Yeah. And you get to a point, too, where it's like, well, I guess I got to do what these people say because if I don't, they might put a hit out on me, right?
You just compromise. You've compromised yourself.
Yeah. So, Robert Kennedy, the brother of JFK, took notice of Hoffa and the mafia influence over the Teamsters and made it his mission to get Hoffa in jail.
Because the Kennedys were very anti-mafia.
Yeah, Robert Kennedy was appointed attorney general, and he made it like his mission really was against organized crime and corruption. So he made such a personal enemy of Hoffa. Traditionally, the Teamsters had endorsed Democratic presidential candidates, but Hoffa was so bitter about Robert Kennedy coming after him that when JFK and Nixon ran against each other in 1960, the Union stayed neutral and didn't endorse anyone.
That's a huge thing. I mean, that to this day, it's swaying the unions in political rallies is a huge part of the process at this point, you know? And that's, I guess, shows that they have, in some ways, a massive amount of power, and that comes from the manpower of them, right? Just numbers game, right?
I mean, yeah, it's like 1 million people.
And in an American system, that's 1 million votes in multiple areas with different demographics, right? So that could be very, very powerful to swing different states.
Finally, in 1964, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering, bribery, conspiracy, and mail and wire fraud. The fraud was related to improper use of the Teamsters pension fund, which, like I said, was being used as a financial resource for the mob.
It's not a great look, if I'm honest.
No, the jury tampering was because he apparently he had been put on trial before this, and he kept getting off. And I guess he was offering bribes to jury members in previous trials, and he got convicted of that in this one. He was very Machiavellian, I think. Like, do what you got to do to achieve the thing that you...
Doing the wrong thing for the right reasons isn't always a good enough excuse.
So Jimmy was sentenced to 13 years in prison, but refused to give up his presidency of the Teamsters Union. His friend, Frank Fitzsimmons...
Lad!
Yeah. He was like, nah, I'm still president, even from jail. If the mob leaders can do it, you know, it's like you send the head of a crime syndicate to jail. He still runs the family. Someone just comes in and is like, hey, what you want us to do this week, boss? So his friend, Frank Fitzsimmons, was named acting president in his place. But while Jimmy was in jail, Fitzsimmons started distancing himself from Jimmy and acting on his own ideas rather than what Jimmy wanted.
It sounds like a lot of politics is going on.
Yeah. There's a lot of power struggle, I think, happening here. So we fast forward to 1971. Jimmy Hoffa has been in prison for 7 years. President Nixon pardons him and has him released. But Jimmy had to resign the Teamsters presidency and agree to not be involved in any union or labor organization or management until 1980.
I'm going to throw this out there. Nixon, not as bad as everyone thinks he is. By today's standards, wouldn't have been impeached.
Actually, I want to do an episode about Watergate.
A couple of wiretaps is not going to get you impeached nowadays. It's just not.
Well, we'll dig into that in a future episode. For sure, I think.
That isn't for now.
Yeah, because that's another thing that's like I grew up hearing a lot of references to, but happened just enough before my time that I don't actually know all the details about it that I'd like to. Hoffa didn't like losing his power and immediately started to make plans to get back into Teamsters leadership.
Is he a team player or is he a Jimmy Hoffa player? Is he doing what's best for everyone else or is he doing what's best for himself?
Good question. I think different people would answer that question differently. But I don't know how much of a team player he totally was. But he did do a lot for his union members. So, I don't know. Here's the thing. The mob members who were also in leadership positions at this time didn't want Jimmy Hoffa back. They had more control over the pension fund without him. He wanted them to start paying back what they had borrowed. They didn't want to. Fitzsimmons was more willing to be flexible with them. And there was a suspicion that while he was in jail, Hoffa had snitched on them like a dirty weasel, giving information to the FBI about the misuse of the Teamster pension fund and other illicit activities the mob members were up to.
I mean, you can't blame him, frankly. And so the mafia were thinking that better not to have him back in because he was such a strong figure and would stand up for himself and the rights of the union rather than just bend to the mafia's will.
Yeah, I think so.
So a strong leader then, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Someone who would actually use some of his power and not just let them have the power. And here's the thing. You don't snitch on the mob and get away with it. And that's what takes us back to July 30th, 1975, at the Red Fox restaurant. Hoffa and Tony Provenzano had a falling out, and Hoffa planned to meet with Tony to work things out, aided by a mediator, Tony Jack Giacolone. According to the FBI, Tony Jack was one of the big guys in a Sicilian crime family, and Tony was also a prominent member of a Genovese crime family in New Jersey. Allegedly, Tony had multiple people killed or assaulted for challenging his Teamster leadership. But neither Tony was ever at the Red Fox restaurant. Was it all a setup? Both men had pretty tight alibis for the time Hoffa disappeared, making sure to be publicly visible in other places at the time.
That doesn't mean you didn't tell someone else to do it. I mean, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
The difficulty is it seems to have three different factions against him, possibly.
The FBI doesn't like him.
The FBI and the government, essentially, don't like him. The mafia don't like him. And the people running the union now might not want him back. Honestly, he sounds like he was a brave man in many ways.
Brave or possibly so inflated with himself that he just assumed that he could do these things because he wanted to and to no risk to himself. It's hard to know, because it really could be either thing.
I imagine coming out of jail, you wouldn't feel like you were untouchable anymore.
No, but he did agree to not be part of the Teamster leadership until 1980 and immediately set about trying to do it anyway.
Look, we can all get in on the details here, Paula, but I feel like, don't worry about it.
Here's another interesting detail. Both Tony and Tony Jack deny ever having set up a meeting with Jimmy Hoffa at the restaurant, even though that's what Hoffa said he was going there to do.
Again, he could be trying to set them up.
That's possible.
I don't know how, but
So Hoffa's car is found in the parking lot of the Red Fox, and witnesses say they saw him getting into a maroon Lincoln or Mercury car with 3 other people in it. The police then find...
Never go to a second location.
Never go to a second location. I learned that from Oprah, Because they're just going to kill you at the second location.
And like Oprah says, with your help, we can rebuild Hawaii. Not my money, but with your help, we can rebuild Hawaii. My land was fine, but with your help, if we rebuild Hawaii, I could buy more of the land there and sell it to my billionaire friends.
So the police then find a maroon Mercury belonging to Tony Jack's son, and dogs find Hoffa's scent in it. Now, allegedly, it had been borrowed on July 30th by Charles Chucky O'Brien, who happened to be Chucky O'Brien, who happened to be Jimmy Hoffa's foster son. Was Chucky driving the car that Jimmy got into, putting him at ease so he would miss how dangerous the situation actually was? Or was the car nowhere near the Red Fox restaurant because Chucky was using it to deliver fish, as he claimed?
Chucky and his fish deliveries. I told him one day it would get him into trouble.
This is the strangest alibi to me, to be like, well, I had a box of fish. They were like, we found blood in your car. And he's like, yeah, the fish started to, thaw and got blood back there.
The fish started a fight and they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. I feel like they would know if it was... I mean, then again, it's a different time. There isn't the forensics that we have today.
He's like, I had to clean it because it was fish blood. I don't know.
That's such a bull. That's not... Oh, I had to get the car valeted completely inside and out because of a fish smell in there. No other reason, but I had to do that. I don't like this.
Jimmy Hoffa's son, James Hoffa, named for his father, didn't believe it either and outright accused Chucky of having something to do with his dad's disappearance. Here's a fun fact. The current leadership of the Teamsters today, James P. Hoffa.
This is a messy situation.
But nothing's ever been proven, right? And mafia members have stayed pretty tight-lipped about it, except for the ones who haven't.
Especially Tommy Tightlips.
Especially Tommy Tightlips. But then you've got Tommy Looselips, right? Coming out of the woodwork on their deathbeds, claiming to know where Hoffa's body is, claiming to have seen his murder, or claiming to be the one who did the deed. There's one theory that Jimmy Hoffa was actually D.B. Cooper, which made me laugh a lot, but they don't look anything alike.
I believe that one.
I thought you might like that one. So Frank Sheeran, the Irishman, who Martin Scorsese made a movie about, claims he did it, even though he was good friends with Hoffa. That he, Chucky O'Brien, and Sally Bugs Bergoglio, these names, lured Hoffa into the Mercury, drove him to a house, and Sheeran shot him in the back of the head. Police found blood in the house Sheeran told them the shooting took place in, but it didn't match Hoffa's.
I mean, if you've got a murder house, it's just our murder house where we do our murders, so...
It was one of those kinds of places, right? Yeah, there's a lot of blood in here. There are rumors that Jimmy Hoffa was taken to a local waste facility and put in an incinerator. Buried under Giant Stadium. Buried under a man's suburban Detroit driveway. In a shallow grave in a field in Oakland County, Michigan, not far from the Red Fox restaurant. Stuck in a steel drum and buried in a landfill in New Jersey. But no matter how many of these leads the FBI follows up on, no body has ever been found.
Do the first one. If you're going to do one of those, do the first one in an incinerator. That's got to be the best way.
There is this guy, this former mafia leadership guy who has a YouTube channel now. Michael Franzini or something like that. Yeah.
I am familiar with his YouTube channel. It's good. Yeah, I know it. He does things where he talks about the mafia representation in things like The Simpsons and stuff like that. It's a great channel.
So he said, I've talked to somebody who knows what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. I believe him. His body's definitely wet. Which I guess means he was, thrown in the ocean?
Point a river.
Or a river or something. He's swimming with the fishes. But he's not saying much else. And, honestly, I'm not inclined to believe him. He's probably burned up, right? He's been cremated. We're never going to find him. I don't think this is a mystery that will ever be properly solved.
That is, of course, if he was killed at all.
Right.
Because there's no reason to say he's even dead. Maybe he just removed himself from the whole situation and went to Brazil. I don't know.
Maybe he entered the witness protection program and disappeared with a new identity after snitching on the mob to the federal government. That's possible.
I mean, it's like a movie star going into witness protection and hoping to stay undercover because he was that famous.
Yeah, he'd have to really, like, lay low or get some plastic surgery or something, probably. But, like, the FBI keeps trying to solve the case and it's never happening. Is it because they don't want it to be solved? Because they're protecting him? Or because they're the ones who took him out? Or was Hoffa murdered by the mob because they wanted to maintain control of the Teamsters pension fund and they needed him out of the way? I don't know.
I mean, the thing is, though, when you're such a huge political component, I don't think it's beyond the realm of belief that the government took him out or someone in the government took him out. I mean, that's also a hugely plausible thing to happen. There's a lot of people who's, without getting into it too much, there's a lot of people who have a fall and it's because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, finding out some information that they didn't need to know, you know? And that happens. We're kidding ourselves if we don't know that happens all the time.
I don't know if it happens all the time, but I think it's fair to say that it happens.
Oh, yeah, it's not like it's a daily occurrence, but it happens.
Well, what happened to Jimmy Hoffa? I don't think we'll ever know, but someone does. And I think they're taking the truth about Jimmy Hoffa's grave to their own. What do you think, Matthew?
We're on the street now with this guy. Do you know who did it? I wouldn't be saying anything if I knew who did it. Can we read into that you do know? No, I just said I don't know. Can we read into that? I've watched a few news reports on this.
Did you watch that interview of the guy who's like, so would you say, he's like, I take the fifth on that? Like, I'm not, so can we imply, he's like, or can we infer blah, blah, blah? And he's like, I don't know, interpret it however you want.
Yeah, it's like, I just said I'm not talking about it. It's like,
yeah.
Dude, there was this one guy who was just going around asking people on the news if they killed Jimmy Hoffa. Fascinating. Did you kill him? And it's like, yeah, I did. You got me. Do you know what? In some ways, I see this as a very interesting mystery, historical mystery. And I get that. But on the other hand, there's a reason we don't do too many of these types of stories.
Yeah.
Because Jimmy Hoffa was a father.
Yeah.
And a person who was meaningful in ways that didn't involve his work to a group of people whose family lost a father and a husband. And
yeah.
It's interesting and it's fun and rich, I suppose, to talk about this now. But it is interesting. It is fun to try and solve a mystery because it's a fascinating Sherlock Holmesian case. But it's also a tragedy and a murder, and someone was killed. And as much as I would like to make jokes and have fun with the story, it's not ancient history.
No, it's very recent. Well, this is part of what I was like, I think about the mob and I think of like, I don't know, like Prohibition or something. And even that's not that long ago in the grand scheme of history. But like, this is real and this is recent. And I'm like, wow, that's a real thing. Organized crime is a real thing. It's not fiction.
Yeah.
And it's happened still. It's wild to me.
And it would be satisfying to find an answer to this, to know what had happened, but really so that the people involved can be brought to justice. More than the satisfaction of a mystery being solved. If the mystery is solved, someone might be going to jail still.
Yeah. If they're not already dead, yeah.
Thank you so much for doing the research on this episode, Paula. This was super interesting and something that, frankly, I did not know too much about. So it was really great to hear. And it's a reference I can now contextualize, which is always something that's good.
Yeah.
If you want to contextualize some references for some people, you can. When you say, I like this podcast, it's called Remember, and you can say, look, I'll contextualize that for you. Here's a link to the video that I watched about Jimmy Hoffa. Maybe you'll enjoy it. That's a great way to spread knowledge of the podcast far and wide.
Are we professional seguers?
We segue like a mall cop. That's a pun as well. We are not beyond a pun. Thank you very much. It's pretty good. And you can tell your friends that and say that you came up with the joke. That's fine. Other ways you can help us. Let's get back on track with this. You can dingle the dongle and dangle the jingle and jingle your dingle by clicking the button below that says subscribe and click the button below that says share this with someone else and then just send it to everyone you know. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Remember, we appreciate you so much. And until next week, goodbye.
Goodbye.